Welcome to this session, and though we are very flattered at this huge space that's been allocated, I'm not sure what we were supposed to do. It's not an entertainment program at all. I think they expected maybe we're all from India, so some Bollywood. No, no, no. But anyway, welcome to this session on UX in India. And though the topic isn't particularly a new one, but I hope across, this entire panel, all of us on this panel, we will be able to bring to bear fresh perspectives on what the journey has been so far in terms of the user experience ecosystem in India. And all of us have been involved directly or indirectly with that ecosystem for a very long time, and you'll know in a bit about each of our sort of involvement and the context in which we are going to speak about UX in India. You may be wondering, though I see a lot of you from India, so you probably know that the meaning of the term "we are not like that" or "we are like that only." Largely, it's a reference to sort of the local quirks and eccentricities that India exhibits, whether it is the institution of arranged marriage, or it's the way relationships rule over laws of the land, or it's the way we deal with constraints in the ecosystem with jugaad, very much like the term kanju that we heard in the morning in the opening plenary. All of these, very local ways that we use and adopt different kinds of new technologies even, or just deal with our everyday lives. But the thing is, the term "we are like that only," "we are like this only" is used in a very condescending manner very often, patronizingly, negatively, as if it's equivalent to saying anything that we will do in India is not going to be good quality. It is going to be sort of a Band-Aid kind of solution. And I completely disagree with that. And I hope in this panel we will explore what we all think about the fact, are we like that only, or are we not? And the fascinating thing is, just in the last couple of months, as I was sort of exploring the public domain and taking a look at what's written out there about user experience in India. And all of these things you see here, this list of narratives, which I think are very one-sided, which are all about, UX in India, they are good for IT. They're so analytical. They're really not good for design, for user experience, research or design, or any kind of this design thinking. They copy everything. They're plagiarists. So don't ever think they can do any original work in this area. They can't stand up and defend their design. It's like always saying yes, sir, to anybody who sort of says, hey, I don't want that particular solution, is not okay, and they'll immediately discard it. They don't have courage of their conviction. The clutter of Indian design. It's so cluttered. It reflects the ecosystem there, which is so cluttered. And then, design coolies. Just send them wireframes to do. That's all they're good for. There's no good education program, no good UX or design education program. I was quite horrified, to be honest, to see all these narratives out there on the net. And I think it's all the more reason that we explore how much of this is where we are, and how much of this perhaps, of course, I'm not saying none of this is true. Of course, we are not, it's not a perfect ecosystem, but I think it isn't quite like this. And there has been evolution and progress in the last decade and a half. So I'm hoping that across all the speakers on the panel, we will present a view from our different perspectives. And to do that, here we are. So I'll start with an introduction about myself. I've been involved in user experience in India for the last 16 years. And all of it has been with Human Factors International. I had start up the Indian and Asian operations there. And in these 16 years, I've seen a lot of changes, lots of growth, lots of progress. I feel very encouraged and very heartened to see what's going on in the field across India. And I will, of course, share those experiences through the discussion we have today. And I would like to then ask Girish to introduce himself.
Hi, thanks Apala. I'm Girish Prabhu. I moved to India again in 2006. So it's been 10 years, and before that I was in US, worked with Eastman Kodak Company, HP, Intel, managing user experience design and innovation companies. And back in India, I worked for Intel for 3 years, and then that's when, about 5 years back, I moved to academics. And I have two roles that I play there. I have a lab, which is basically human-centered innovation and experience design, which looks at both the top tier of India and the middle and bottom tier of India, and what kind of new innovations one could think about. And I also have a role of, as a dean of one of the schools within Srishti Institute. It's one of the premier institutes in Bangalore. General design, typical design like RISD in US, modeled around US and European schools. But we also have a lot of interesting things that happen, and as course of discussion, we will talk about that. That's me.
Thank you. Over to you, Sarit.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sarit Arora. I've been in the field of UX and design and as well as innovation for about 16 years now. So I think to share with you, my journey started when I was in school and I was learning computer science, and I realized that, that first thing that happened was that I was very intrigued with the fact that you could draw pictures using programming language. And then I realized there was a, somewhere there was a mix between graphics and computer science, and that intrigued me to take that up. However, I think given the pressures what are in India, I sort of followed a very typical path, got into mechanical engineering, and then sometime down the line, I got introduced to the word ergonomics, and that was very intriguing. It was so exciting that I started seeking out some of the companies that were setting up shop in India to look at that. At the same time, I heard about this institute called National Institute of Design. I did my product design from there, and it was interesting that the word product design is sort of now making a comeback. Started my career with Human Factors International. I was there for 10 years. In fact, a lot of my grounding in user experience design happened there. And then I thought, it would be interesting to add a product company into the mix, and I joined Yahoo. So I led the Yahoo design team in India for about close to 3 years, and then there were very interesting things happening in Yahoo in Sunnyvale, so I moved here and I'm here. And one of the things which is very exciting for me is to see how design culture is created within the product companies, to see that what you design actually gets shipped, and how do you work with cross-functional partners to make that stuff happen. Because so while there's a good design talent, until and unless there are design enablers within the group, I think you can't make things happen. So I think that's something that I'm really sort of passionate about and making effort towards that.
Thanks, Sarit. Janki, your turn.
So hi everyone, thank you for coming after lunch to be participate in this panel. My name is Janaki Kumar. I lead a team called the Design and Co-Innovation Center at SAP Labs, Palo Alto. Some of my team members are here, thank you. So at this moment in time, my direct team members are based in Palo Alto, but in the course of my management history, I have led teams in India, in China, in Germany, as well as in the US. So when Apala asked me to be part of this panel, my first reaction was, Apala, I don't have a team right now there, but she said my perspective would be interesting, and I hope it is interesting for you as well.
Last but not the least, Sudhindra.
Thank you, Apala. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I work in IBM Interactive, also called IBM Digital these days, as their Chief Design Officer in India. I have been in the world of design for the last about 17 years. And especially in the last about 10 years, I have worked with large companies and have seen an evolution happen in the way companies have transformed, embracing the new world of the digital, and accordingly, the design teams getting transformed along with that. So I have helped teams, companies build really large design teams. Before IBM, I used to work with Sapient, and I was an experienced design director there, putting up a team that was ready for the new world. So in that work of mine, I've been exposed to the design ecosystem of India, which, like anywhere else, we see growing and ready to explore. And I hope to share those views with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we'll begin with the first question that I'm going to first put to the panel, including myself, and then we'll leave it open for any of you to ask a couple of questions or if you have comments, etc. So the first question I have for the panel is, in your opinion, do you think the Indian ecosystem, the UX ecosystem, has progressed between the time when you started engaging with that ecosystem and now? Has it progressed on different fronts like the education programs, the way organizations are looking at UX as a differentiator, as well as UX talent? Has there been a growth in the supply of UX talent in India, which certainly wasn't the case 15 years ago, I can tell you that? Or is it only one or two of these areas that have seen progress, or is it something completely different, or has there been no progress? So over to you, Girish.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think absolutely. We may not be world-class yet, but we are on the path. And partly I want to thank Human Factors International for starting that journey in India to create a goal for creating UX as a field. UX is not as an education stream in India at that time. And it's kind of interesting. HFI almost became like an university. A lot of people joined HFI, worked there, and then went into other jobs. So I'm going to answer this question in three phases. My work with India before I moved to India, and I used to lead global teams when I was at HP and Intel. And one of the things that used to come out was always Indian work is not as good. And as you said, let's send them wireframes. They don't know how to do strategy and those kind of things. 2006, when I moved to India, I managed a global team of designers for Intel with my teams in Brazil, US, India, and China. And we started slowly building. And I remember that time, because UX was not a big field, I partnered with Human Factors International to bring UX designers. And we started this journey slowly, and people started building stuff which was, I would say, no different than what the designers in US were building. 2009, I left Intel. Well, I didn't leave Intel. Intel asked me to come back to the US if I wanted to manage a global team, and that's when I joined Srishti. And part of it, from an education perspective, when I started looking at, and my reason of partnering with HFI when I moved to India was I wasn't getting the right kind of designers coming out of academic system. And what I've started doing at Srishti, Srishti is an institute of typical design schools with multiple designs. And I have started programs there around human-centered design and experience design, which is not only looking at current way of designing, the current UX design, which is for whether it's mobile and big screens, but even going beyond that, beyond screens. How do you design for non-screen-based interactions? And my feeling is there is an amazing infrastructure. If I then look at MNCs and bigger companies, every big company now has a studio, and if you look at the pictures of these studios, they are no different than what you see in the US. Their goals are to grow from 20 to 50 people. There are design agencies which are world-class in India. They are training their own folks. HFI is one of them, and also growing. So I would say there is substantial ecosystem for user experience, both at the top tier of creating the best UI screens and those kind of things, but UX also is much bigger than just designing screens. There is a big number of population which is at the bottom, which needs beyond screen designs, and UX needs to play a big role there, and we have a fantastic ecosystem that's growing. I wouldn't say it's world-class yet, but we are on that path.
So Girish, one question I had was, are you seeing an uptake in the kind of number of students you're opting for UX courses in Srishti?
Absolutely. I came from India 2 days back, just finishing first round of selection for my bachelor's program. We have 40 seats available this year, and we had 400 applications, and we had to shortlist 220 for interviews. And you wouldn't believe, these are 10 plus 2, which is high school graduates. Earlier, high school graduates from India were very focused: physics, chemistry, math, biology. And I was extremely surprised. The students were coming with portfolio where they had started learning Java, HTML, CSS, portfolios which had design and technology as part of it. And it's a good situation to be in, but I'm looking at, oh my God, all these 120 I could take in, but I can only take 40. So it is growing. And at the same time, there are a lot of students, and I look at my master's program now, which I have both in experience design as well as design-led innovation. They don't just want to do screen-based design. They want to learn that, but they want to also do beyond. And yeah, it is a market where people are realizing that this is a field that I want to be in. I want to make a dent. They also know that design and technology and business has to play together. One more thing is the three-circle model is not what they are looking for. Not at bachelor's level, they are new, but at master's level, they're also looking at sustainability and ecological design that they are interested in. So yes, I mean, there are people who are interested.
Okay, cool. So Sarit, you have a different perspective, which is not so much academic, but practice-based, whether in India or now, as you're working here, but you probably still work with a lot of designers based in India. So what is your perspective about this question?
Okay. So I think I'll answer it in two parts. I think the first is, what does India has to offer? So I think this is something that when I started my career, we used to talk about this a lot, right? How is that India can offer good design? So one of the very key elements of design is empathy. And I feel that, I think hospitality, empathy, if you look at some of the services that India offers, is great from that perspective. I think when that value is ingrained inherently, there's a lot of potential energy around that can be unleashed. Mm-hmm. And what I think maybe the education and few of the enablers within the organization that it can do is to kind of make sure that comes to the fore. So when I started initially, and I was in the service or UX consulting company, so there we would, we would be called when something was really wrong in an organization, right? And we would have a lot of say and help fix things and going at the top level because the key decision makers had got us in. But talking from a product perspective, I think the big difference that I found, so when I was leading Yahoo in India, there were 2-3 key products we launched which were for global markets, including, say, Yahoo Groups, Yahoo Answers, Yahoo Search. And the UX has to be an equal party to the decision-making process. And I think that the biggest difference that I saw was that design was centralized at that point in time in Yahoo. And at that point in time, design had a lot of say. And whenever we used to get a pushback from engineers about something, we could actually put a weight behind because the way the design was organized within the organization. And also, second part, I think the key difference was the way the changes were happening in terms of the way design was getting implemented. Because we, as designers, would design something, but at the end of the day, the custodians of actually making it or shipping it was with the front-end engineers and the engineers. And then we had to really find a way to do a cross-disciplinary working culture with them to make sure that what we design actually gets shipped. And to talk about there, I think I realized that though we were shipping world-class products, I found the gaps not in terms of designers, but in terms of awareness of design within the engineers and the product managers, especially amongst the product managers. Because what I felt was that product managers were taking a lot of design decisions that we used to do as a part of design consulting companies. And product managers would take decisions on strategy in terms of customer experience, in terms of the user path journey, and then they would expect designers to come and paint a picture. But designers would tell them that, hey, design is not just about that, it's about the overall experience. And that tension was actually good but I realized that there was a lot of gap, and there's a learning opportunity which I think can be made better, is where engineers and product managers, and especially the other legs of the stool, can be made better aware. That's the difference that I found when I'm leading teams here, that the amount of friction that I had to dealing with the business side of things and the engineering side of things is far lesser, because they're already aware about, I think they've gone through the cycle of fixing things and learning that you can't ship great design unless you are working in a collaborative framework. And I think it's getting really better. Some of the teams are doing a great job in India, like if you look at ClearTrip and a few of the other examples. But there's an opportunity where we can get other cross-functional partners and make them more aware about design.
Okay. Do you see a lot of, professionals from the technology side crossing over to do UX? Does that happen in Yahoo, or is it sort of very watertight? Technology is technology professionals and UX is design professionals. How does that work?
I see a lot of that. There are a lot of my colleagues who were in software development, a lot of colleagues who were in ethnography or the other side of things, but a lot of software developers who, in the course of building products, they got more aware about design as a profession, HCI, and then they learned on the job, and then they are moving slowly into this, or they got additional degree, and then they moved into this profession.
Okay, cool. Janaki, I know your perspective is interestingly a little bit different, because you haven't been sort of in India working with Indian teams, but that in itself is what would make it refreshing to see what you have experienced in your interactions.
Yeah, so the reason why we set up that lab in Bangalore initially, and also in Gurgaon, was to co-locate the design talent along with the development talent. And that is really, in fact, a very critical piece, and having designers there. So if you just simply ask what does India offer in terms of designers, it's very critical, because that collaboration on-site, face-to-face is really critical. Now, going beyond that, how effective is that collaboration? Is UX viewed as a tactical function? Is UX viewed as a strategic function? And I think this is, we can take a step back, and even if we were to not look at India by itself, many companies go through this journey or a maturity model where they initially think of UX as more a tactical function. Let's just make the screens better. But as companies get more used to it and they start to collaborate across the different disciplines, they get a better sense and a more appreciation of what design can bring to an organization. So I think it is a normal journey that India is going through, along with many companies, in realizing the potential and value of design. The one thing that I would add is that in preparation for this panel, I did a little survey amongst my colleagues who are currently working in India, and I got some very interesting insights. One of the things is that the people who are hiring designers are, in fact, not designers themselves. So what tends, at least this is the feedback that I got amongst the small survey that I did, that if you are not a designer, if you do not understand what you're looking for, you may be, in fact, looking at a design at a very superficial level of, can this person paint the best screen? But in fact, when you have the experience, then you look at what process does this person follow? How do they think through the decisions? How do they balance out the different constraints as they're coming up with the solution? So I think having someone with design knowledge making the hiring decisions can go a long way in just making sure that the design is valued and in the right place in the organization, regardless of the geographical location of it. And India is just, in a certain place at a certain time. I was really happy to see the academic programs that are now available in India with the cross collaboration and as well as with an eye towards innovation. Because India has IIT, which has, amazing, engineering talent. We have the design institutes, which have amazing designers. But what would be great is if there is an opportunity for students to kind of work together during their academic phase, so that they have an opportunity to communicate when they get to the workplace. So if the designers are encountering engineers for the very first time, when they go into an industry, they are at a disadvantage because they haven't learned the language, they haven't learned to compromise, it'll take them some time to get there. So these cross-collaboration programs can go a long way. And this is true for in the US as well. There are programs like CMU and Boston University and Northwestern who offer these collaborative programs where students from different schools within the university work together and in co-op programs especially, working with industry. So the sooner we can expose students to industry and they get much more savvy about communication, I think that will also go a long way. Finally, one of the things that India can offer in the larger ecosystem, we were even discussing it here, who attended the plenary this morning from Daya? Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was just super amazing. And one of the things that she talked about the African diaspora is the concept of Kanju. And India has a similar concept as well, this eye towards innovation, this very scrappy, quick, make it, in the Silicon Valley we say fail fast, fail early to succeed sooner, and this concept is ingrained in India to work within constraints. In Stanford there's a program called Designing for Extreme Affordability, and in students in the US who grew up in abundance, this is a big mind shift for them to design in that constrained environment. And I think Indian designers will have a leg up, given the right resources, given the right the context to design for the next billion. So I think these are some very promising things that Indian designers can offer the world, but there are some infrastructure pieces that have to be in place in order to fulfill that promise.
So Janaki, I had one question. In SAP, do you have, if you have, in Bangalore, Gurgaon, where you have designers, are they designing for the rest of the world, or is it anything specifically for India?
I mean, SAP is a global company. The enterprise product is usually for the world. So we tend to design for the globe. Some teams like myself, the Design and Co-Innovation Center, we get to work one-on-one with certain companies on their strategic projects. But in general, we really have to think about all requirements, which makes it interesting.
Exactly. So even if they are Indian designers, they're located in India, but they really have to think about users across the world.
Right. And if you're a US designer, you have to think about users in India. Mm-hmm. So, it goes both ways.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So, Dheendra, your perspective through, I think, human factors, Sapient, IBM, what do you feel about the Indian ecosystem for UX?
What I see is, actually, when we talk about design in India, what I see is that essentially there are two Indias. The story of India is actually two Indias. One of them is the more popular one, the Slumdog Millionaire India, which is more where you feel that the elephants are walking all on the roads. There are more elephants than the cars in India. So that's a view a lot of people have. I'm sure it's more popular here. And the other one is where the snake charmers, are more than the snakes themselves. So there is that vision of India, where what people see, which we may call it as the older India. Well, first of all, let me tell you that that's not true. So there is a little older India, but that's this is an exaggerated version of that India. But there is also another India. There is a new India, which is like a submarine under the water. It's going slow and steadily. It's the more intelligent India. It's the more resilient India, if I may. Highly innovative stuff happens there. And what I'm happy to note is that the design ecosystem actually lives in that India, which is the new India. Now that submarine, that design ecosystem needs a fuel to go. And the business houses in India today are, I believe, are that particular fuel that's fueling this India, this particular ecosystem. The business houses in India today, and I speak to quite a few of them, the CMOs, CEOs, especially in India, and they have stopped thinking themselves as an Indian company. They do not want to be the best in India, they want to be the best in the world. Now, not that they want to be on a global map, that has gone long ago. They want to be the best in the world. So whoever you talk to, they want to be the best in the world, and that puts an enormous pressure and also enormous excitement into the Indian, the design ecosystem to be actually best in the world. So you're automatically looking at global benchmarks because you want to, do the right thing for your client. So that, I think, is good to see, and that has happened, in the last few years. So that has fueled the design ecosystem really well, and all of these different parts are gearing towards meeting these business demands. But the old and the new India, because they work closely together, I think they've imbibed a few things. Sarit did touch upon, the fact that there is empathy which is naturally ingrained in us. There is the hospitality of India. If you've been to India, you kind of relate to that really well. So there is that empathy that we don't add on when we are researching. It's actually ingrained in us. All you need to teach them is how to do great interviews. But the empathy part comes within. The second thing I believe that is probably a differentiator when I look at the other design teams and an Indian design team is the cultural cognizance. I call it the cultural cognizance because when you're thinking anything in India, you're always thinking about which part of India, for example. So it's highly differentiated, and it's like a multitude of countries in one. It's very different in a more uniform culture like a US or any other part of the West where you don't get that naturally, right? So I think that's another aspect that is differentiating in the design ecosystem. And thirdly, we spoke about Jugaad and the new word that I heard today, which is a kanju. So essentially the constraints, the resource that is not available to you makes you creative, that much more creative. So the constraints themselves are the basis of creativity. I think that's the third angle that I can see where the ecosystem of the design ecosystem of India is really being benefited, if I may, with these kind of colors that it has got. There is a long way to go. I do agree that there is a long way to go. There is an influx of designers, but nowhere near enough than what is needed by the industry. And I would again like Girish did, I would like to recognize the role HFI is playing in building that ecosystem in India as well. So those things are happening, but they have to do, all of us have to do a lot more to bring that to a kind of a working ecosystem that is, sustainable. Right now, it's pushing its way through. I think it takes a little time, but there are signs to see that it's in the right path right now. That's the way I see the Indian design ecosystem and the various factors in it.
So do you think India could, in the near future, be a sort of a design hub for IBM globally?
Yeah, very much so. There was a research done recently with NASSCOM and some of the other corporates. It was estimated that about $37 billion is the, they called it the creative work per se, but that's the industry that we are looking at in India. It's a $37 billion industry, the creative industry in India. So that's a huge, potential. And the reason is because companies like IBM and a lot of other companies are looking at India as a design hub also, right? It was a technology hub. Now it's slowly also becoming a design hub. So that's absolutely yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I think, to sum it up, I sort of agree with what you're saying because you heard very similar perspectives. And in just my experience over the last 16 years with HFI, I've seen personally, just when we started the organization, there were 4 designers. It was very difficult to find usability people at that time, later user experience. But now we have about 100 designers. This journey also means, exactly as all of them have said, a growth in the design education and programs that are now available. So there's more abundance in terms of even the supply of designers. But it also means people are willing to take up this field of study, which wasn't so much the case, a decade and a half ago. And that can only be possible if the field is being looked at as something that's not just interesting, but also, of course, lucrative and has a growth path. So that's one thing I notice. Just out of curiosity, I looked up, because of the panel that we were going to have, I looked up one of the job portals, Naukri.com in India. When we started 16 years ago, because it was so difficult to find professionals in this field, so I remember these job portals were around, so going to a job portal which had 36 jobs listed under the category of usability and design. When I looked up one of the job portals, Naukri.com, just I think about 5 days ago, there were 4,126 jobs listed under the category of user experience. So, that's a lot of progress in terms of, obviously, the ecosystem is flourishing. I also see another very interesting perspective in the last couple of years, which is that organizations, multinational organizations, are looking at India as you said, Sudhindra, as a hub for user experience. This was not the case even 5 years ago. So we've had, and in the last 2 years, I've worked with several other colleagues in having multinational organization from Europe asking to set up, say, a 60-person user experience team in India to service the entire world for that organization. So it's not just for designing for India or for emerging markets, no, for requirements across the world. This, I think, is a very interesting development and a marker of progress and recognition of, the sort of the quality and value that one can get in terms of design and user experience, research, design skills. So all of this, as well as local businesses where 16 years ago, I remember going to large organizations in India and pitching for selling usability, as it was called then. And there's a lot of, what is this usability? And why should we pay for it? I mean, don't you think you should do it free? There was that kind of attitude. But today, it's completely changed, completely. And prices that we charge for just as consultants is not really that different from what we would charge in the rest of the world. So the value of user experience as a way to differentiate, their business propositions and understand their customers is certainly at a different level altogether today than it was years ago. So I think there's been a lot of progress, but I agree there's way to go also. There are warts that we have, but I know that it's evolving, and we will certainly get to the level of a global sort of source of very, very good user experience design. That's my perspective. Okay, any questions from any of you or comments before we move to the next question? Sure, if you could, come up to the mic.
My name is Nitin Urdureshi, and I've been in the field for 30 years. I've also headed a design school in Pune. I worked, right now I'm working with Persistent. I've got a group of 250 people. The question is, the image that designers carry, probably that's one of the reasons that Indian designers carry. That's probably one of the reasons that we don't get to do the quality job that a UX designer persona would typically do. What I've been thinking is that probably what we need in India is a design finishing school after you do your either the PG in design or something. Probably a 6 months, 3 months, whatever, I don't know. This idea came from, when I was at Infosys, we were working with McKinsey, and I said, why is that, the ideas that they gave us were pretty similar to what my design team also gave us. So I was wondering, why could they get $1 million and we were sort of, kept in a corner. So they said two things probably that McKinsey thrives on. One is problem solving, and two, very important thing, presentation. And I think that's where I thought, that's where the aha moment came in. I said, probably if we do a focused effort on creating designers who are finished in presenting themselves, also clear-cut communication of problem solving, saying that this is my research, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 problems, and I solved it in 1, 3, 4, to 3, 4, 5 ways, clear cut. I think that would help quite a bit. I think probably Srishti can take lead or something like that.
Okay. Any comments from you on that? I do agree with you that presentation skills is something that we have to sort of work on quite a lot when we get designers.
So I think one perspective that I have is that design is storytelling, right? And since design is storytelling, and also designers have to defend their designs through a design rationale with a very clear-cut design rationale and design principles. I think ability to tell a good story around the design and also ability to project the user story is really important, because at that, one of the abilities of designer is to project a sensory outcome of what that experience should be, and that inherently has to be there.
And partly I think it's Indian education system, the high school education system to be blamed, and that's changing. You would see many schools including storytelling and creativity and other things as part of their curriculum. And what I see in, for example, in Srishti, we have in design school, not only developing the portfolio, but how do you tell your story? How do you make a case? A lot of times you see students who have done a fantastic job, but that humbleness, the Indianness of, I have done my job, pulls them back, rather than coming out and saying, look, this is what I have done, this is why I have done it. That's one thing. The other thing is this multidisciplinary approach towards technology, business, and design being taught right from the beginning. That's happening now. And I look at students over the last 5 years, and I see a huge difference of what they're able to communicate and what they are able to present.
Okay.
I can share an industry view, actually, just to add on to that, and of course I agree with all of these. The thing is that when you see a design-educated person, design school-educated person, and probably an industry, who's grown in the industry, the major difference is in the way he presents his story. And as David Kelly calls it, the creative confidence, right? So that's the major difference. The skills and the work, I don't see, a major difference, but the way he presents it, I think you're absolutely right. That's something that a mature ecosystem does really well, and that's where we are going towards as well. So I agree with you, and work is on to make that happen. Yeah.
Yeah, Dan.
Hi, Dan Rosenberg. I made my first business trip to Bangalore in 1988. And the labor exchange rate was roughly 22 engineers in Bangalore for one in Silicon Valley. When I left my last corporate job, it was down to 1 to 2, 1 to 3. So there's been a major change in macroeconomics. And I'm interested in the panelists' opinion if this is actually a good thing for the Indian design market, or it causes another headwind to overcome.
Interesting. So I can share a perspective.
Sure.
I think the biggest change that has happened since 1988 is that the Indian economy has grown. There's a lot of local work as well. So a lot of designers and design students who are getting out, they are getting into Indian companies which are catering to the design to audience. Like if you look at companies like, say, Redbus, if you see companies like Flipkart or Ola, right, or ClearTrip, these are all Indian brands, and they are catering to an Indian audience. So I think while what you're saying is absolutely, right, that the ratio or the labor differential, is no longer valid. However, I think there are two, because these two things. One, the economy has grown. There's local market. The opportunity for learning of designer is increasing multifold. So if you look at a product like Zomato, right? Zomato is a world-class product, which is a Yelp equivalent, but you can see it's one of the top products in South Africa and England, and so what's happening is that because of the opportunity to learn, the designers are able to hone their skills, and they're able to get to world-class, at least in these specific pockets. However, they have to do a lot more now to compete from a price perspective.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, apart from Indian companies, startup ecosystem is also extremely big in India, and glad to note that they are UX friendly. They understand that one of their differentiator could be UX. So a couple of my master's students recently had a job offer from industry and startups, and they decided to join startup as UX designers and being equity partners. Right? So yes, there is that thing where the designers will have to learn new things, but at the same time, I always look at YouTube's, and Google has become the new gurus of teaching things, and they are looking at what world is producing, and accordingly then the market price increases, but that's not going to make that big of a dent. I think it's going to stabilize depending if you're a good designer. And when I say designer, it's not just design educated. There are institutes in Bangalore now. There is an institute called Institute of Product Leadership. Their goal is to create 10,000 product leaders, and we partner with them to do UX and innovation training. So product leaders who are technology people are getting trained, and that's going to increase the charges that they're going to put on UX design.
Hi, my name is Ru. I'm from Splunk. I work with many Indian designers, so I see myself that there is already a strong representative of Indian in this multinational organizations. But I also know that there is a strong active startup community in India. What kind of role UX designers are playing in this local startup community? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. As Girish said, we are seeing an enormous amount of activity in the startup area in terms of UX in this last year or so. And I can tell you that because, of course, people poach our staff all the time. So yes, there's just incredible, salaries that are being offered to, as long as you have done a design degree and you have got a year's experience in an international sort of design team. It's unimaginable, the kind of boom in demand that the startups have fueled in the last year. Yeah.
That's the other thing that has happened is there are few activities. For example, there is an activity called Gurukul, where engineering students, business students, and design students are brought together. And that has created networks of, I know many of our students who have decided not to join a startup, not to join Indian industry or a MNC, but start their own startup where somebody that they met during Gurukul, they have come together and started their own company and actually aiming to become a product company, which is a great thing. Indian government is putting huge emphasis on startup ecosystem. Yeah. Every state is creating incubators and accelerators to help startups. Yeah. And designers thinking like that I could be a startup is a fantastic journey that they could be on.
Yeah, totally agree with that. So I think one of the biggest initiatives in Government of India is Make in India. And you can't make in India unless you're designing in India and until you have good designers. So that's happening. So I think talking about startups, so I think since there is a startup explosion happening, it also means that the startup founders, there are these specifically 2 or 3 kinds of startups that are happening. One is startup founders are all technology people because they can code and then they can put something out there. So by the time they do this first V1 version of the product and they get an MVP out, then they realize, oh, you know what, I really need design. So there is a lot of awareness that they need design. However, how design fits into their organization, I think they're at a phase where that stuff needs to be solved for. Mm-hmm. And I think this is going to be a make or break of the product, because just making a product work anymore doesn't work anymore, right? It needs to be delightful, it needs to be persuasive and all that stuff. So there's a lot of awareness about design. There is a gap in terms of demand and supply. The amount of money being thrown in terms of getting talent versus actual designers being there on the ground, there's a gap out there. But also great time to be a designer in India right now.
Yeah,
I have a slightly, probably since we are all agreeing, let me disagree a little bit. So the thing is that I agree with largely, but the fact is that the startups ecosystem, they are fueling a lot of designers. Of course, designers are taken in. But I think what has happened in the last, at least some time now, what I have seen personally is that they have not been matured. Or they have not been nurtured, the designers. They've not given a path ahead. So they kind of go in, and these guys are fresh blood, go with a lot of enthusiasm, and the founders are also fresh blood. So it's like a lot of enthusiasm, but then after a while they lose the direction, is what I have seen around. But I'm pretty sure, some of the other things that we will discuss also is to how do you, kind of nurture that, all of those things. But that I think is the current problem that the startups are facing. It's great to start everything, but then how do you sustain? So the startups are learning it some of them the easy way and many of them the hard way. But that's also the other side of the startup ecosystem story.
Yeah, true. Tapan?
Hi, thanks everybody. So thank you very much. So I had a question about, Sarit, as you were mentioning, and you also about the supply side of this problem, the source of engineers, designers. And so I know, Sarit, you went to NID. Apala, I think, did you also go to NID? Yeah.
No.
So I mean, I know HFI staff are NID.
Yeah.
So this is a public university, great expertise in design, but not known to have a lot of expertise on the business or the technology side. Mm-hmm. Similarly for the IITs, great technical depth, not known to have a lot of expertise on the design side. So this is like the Indian public university, like really great depth in specific areas, but not a true university in terms of its breadth. And on the other hand, you see like private initiatives like Shrishti, several others that are trying to really create a liberal arts type of environment, more room for interdisciplinary collaboration. So I guess that's my question, what are some of the trade-offs between public and private universities in terms of reach and access, but also really doing out-of-the-box things in terms of interdisciplinary, project-based entrepreneurial. So, I'm kind of concerned that we're kind of in this niche of a few private universities doing this, but we haven't really reached these big public universities, not to mention the regional universities that could really reach across India. So what's your kind of take on the state of, that's a big question I know, but what's your current take on some of these trade-offs between public, private, undergrad versus postgraduate, interdisciplinary versus narrow in the Indian context, and what are the real needs you think?
Girish, you want to?
Yeah, I think the question gets directed to me because on the academic side, I guess.
And you've also been on the other side. So
you're absolutely right. See, what happens is, we are 20 years old now. This is our 20th year. Last 19 years, we fought accreditation, and for a reason. Because in India, once you get accredited, you have to follow a particular path. It's almost like you're creating cattle. The students come in, you give them the same curriculum, they go out. And Shrishti has always been, we need to teach them a lot of different things, which included, and the name of the school was Shrishti Institute of Art, Design, Technology. This was 20 years back, right? That's what the name was. And so even now the curriculum includes business, design, art, and technology all included. And it allowed us to do that because we were a private, non-accredited institute. We recently got accredited with University of Mysore, but we played our cards in the right way. We said, this is how we want to do it, and you will accredit us with that thing. And it allows us to do it. However, some of the public universities do not have that flexibility. At the same time, if you look at NID has come out with courses such as Design Management Strategy, which is combination of design and business. There are institutes, technical institutes, who are bringing design thinking, user experience into their realm. And so, especially with the programs like Make in India, the startup ecosystem, government is becoming open, and the HRD ministry is being asked to be flexible to create this kind of programs. And my feeling is, over the years, it will change. And part of this has to start from high school education, right? So that is also changing. New boards are including certain things. So hope that will happen.
Yeah. So I think just one follow-up on that. So I have been, on the other side, because in Yahoo, when we used to try to hire designers, so either you would get talent from NID, National Institute of Design, or a Srishti School of Design, or you would find some of these guys who have, with a lot of hard work, they have sort of studied design on their own, but through other means, right? The thing that I've always found a big gap is where a typical a technology university in India doesn't have a good liberal art program. Mm-hmm. And I think I know that problem exists, and I think some of the other IITs like IIT Delhi has a design program, IIT Kanpur has a design program, IIT Kharagpur has started a design program. Now IIT Bombay has a BDES design program. However, I think this problem will continue to exist until and unless a technical education is not treat it just as technical, but as a whole rounded subject. Some of the technical colleges, like I think even one, the Marathwada Institute of Technology, they've started a design program. And then they are investing in the right design teachers to build an ecosystem around it. I think things have started happening, but there's a lot that needs to be done.
Hi, thanks all for being here today. It's really good to hear your perspective on how India sort of fits into the global ecosystem. So I heard mentioned a few times that India is not yet a world-class UX ecosystem. So my question is, what will that look like? What will it mean, and how will you know that you've reached this world-class status, and how will it be different from the definition of, say, world-class in the US or in Europe?
You know, from my perspective, if I put on my sort of consulting hat from HFI, world-class to me would mean that there is no difference in the kind of demand there is for somebody from my Indian design team as from the US design team or the European design team. The client does not say, hey, for this, why don't you have somebody from your US office? The day that question stops being asked, I think I can say with great confidence that we have reached that status where there is no reason for anybody to differentiate. Now, that doesn't mean that at the moment, we are not, but there's a perception out there which still needs to be worked on. So to me, that's sort of validation when that happens.
Yeah, I have a slightly different perspective. In some ways, we are world-class and better than US, and I'll tell you why. If you have to design a screen for these kind of products, which is, to me, based on Maslow's pyramid of what's the next level of need, and we have been asked to follow what Western world thought is an user experience. Yes, we are not there. However, there is another world, right? There is UX to be designed for sustainability. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, you hear of terms like 50-kilometer diet and living in small houses, which is now prevalent and becoming more prevalent in US. I grew up with that. That dates me, but I grew up with that, right? And it's kind of interesting. I mean, I read Goldman Sachs' report on millennials, and millennials are having huge amount of debts, the incomes have gone down, and that's why now they are looking at 50-kilometer diet and so on. Indian designers have been thinking about that for a long time, and they do an amazing UX job, much better than you would see anywhere any designer could even think about in the US. So in one way, we are world-class. In designing these screens, we are catching up. Right?
Yeah. So I have a little different perspective. So I think everybody sort of gives the Apple example, and I think everybody talks about Apple design, and Apple design we can say is world-class, right? But Apple design is world-class not just because they have got world-class designers. Apple design is world-class because there are great design enablers within that organization. Like there are high standards which the engineers are going to even push back sometime to designers and, hey, maybe you can do better. The engineers and the business guys and the marketing guys, when they all come together, and then designers, they also let designers do their job properly. I think that's when also world-class design happens. So for me, I think we are reaching there. However, when we start creating world-class product companies out of India, I think that's when it's going to be. When we create the next Google out of India or next Facebook out of India, like out of the Silicon Valley, that's when I feel it's going to be world-class design, not just because we have great designers, but because we have great technologies which enable great design to happen.
Yeah, and if I were to add a global perspective, I think anywhere where the academics, the whole ecosystem has to work, to have that end goal. If students are taught right from the beginning to be innovative, to collaborate across disciplines, if there's good value value associated with design, all these things have to add up to the end goal of having a world-class designers. So, it's kind of unfair to just look at that designer in isolation and say, why aren't you world-class? Exactly. Because they're fighting a very hard battle. And this is not true just for India. If you look at any other, even between Silicon Valley, designers are surrounded by so much context. There's so much implicit knowledge around what is good design, and if they see something, they know it's good. They know it's bad. That implicit knowledge, it takes some time. So we have to give them a chance.
And also, if you look at India as and compare that with a lot of other the more advanced sort of countries, economically advanced, you see a major difference. Actually, India is better in many ways. Like Girish said, of course, they're better in some context to the more so-called world class. Because do you want to be world class is a big question that you want to ask. First of all, do you want to be world class, or do you want to be one among many, or you want to be completely different and unique? But that apart. I think the advanced economic factors that play in many of the countries also, have not, have still been not as much, able to develop the design ecosystems within there. Like, for example, the European countries, several European countries, and India has a natural advantage of English working for it. So, in many sense, the Indian design teams are far better than a lot of their, European counterparts, for example, right? Many, better in the sense consistently better. So, of course, and then of course, you compare them with, Silicon Valley, maybe there is some way to go, but I think, we're well ahead of many places, actually.
I think we'll have to move on because you've taken a lot of questions. Next, okay, one last question.
I think this one's for you, Girish. You mentioned that there's a bachelor's program in UX in India at Srishti, and you had about 220 interviews with high schoolers coming in for this program. So I wanted to know, what kind of awareness do students have at that age in India, and how do they decide on UX from that early on?
Partly it is, I think, great designs coming into India. At the same time, I mean, there are sessions that are done with high schoolers. The design schools they have started going and then talking to high school students about what design can bring to the table. Visual communication design is still a big thing which drives them, but then they start thinking about, once they start thinking about visual communication design, they come to the websites of schools like Srishti and MIT and others, and then they start realizing that user experience design is a field. We don't call it user experience design in Srishti, we call it human-centered design. But that's kind of then gets them into a role. They start asking questions about what am I going to do and what's the career opportunity, and that's how they get interested.
And what do placements look like? And even from an industry perspective, is there a lot of disparity between engineers and designers back in India, or what does the growth profile look like in the industry for a UX designer?
Career path, you mean?
The career path.
Yeah, Dan Rosenberg can speak to it better than I can, but we do have the career path actually is pretty identical, irrespective of where you are located. So, there's a associate, specialist, senior, principal, and so on. So we have certain levels, and SAP is a pretty flat organization. Some other organizations may have many more levels, and there are certain expectations of capability, responsibility at each of those levels.
Yeah, I think I've got a similar experience. So there are typically, I think, designers in terms of career path have got two paths. One is an individual contributor role, and what's called the IC role, and the other is a people manager, right? In case of IC, I think, you can, even within that, there are layers, right? You can be a researcher, you can be an interaction designer, or you can be a visual designer, and then there is new field which is emerging, which is called a product designer. I think right now, the Indian UX industry is not using the term product designer a lot, but interestingly, I was looking at some of the job postings, and specifically companies or places which have grown up using or leveraging UX in the right way, they are advertising for product designers, people who've got a product business mindset and who can also do design. And so you can take both these paths, and but I think there are only pockets in which the layers of design is understood and where the path is well lined up. In some of the product companies and some of the established UX consulting companies, it's there, but the newer companies, I think they're still struggling with where UX sits in the organization, whether it reports into the engineering organization or the product organization, or maybe and it's sometimes, I think it becomes very tragic when I see a UX in India reporting into marketing organization.
Oh, yeah, that's tragic.
So I think we have all flavors, but I think some of the better models are now sort of coming in, and there's an opportunity for communicating that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next.
That was a lot of interaction around this one question. So let's move on to the next, which is the second one, and then we'll have just time for one more question. So here I wanted to ask all of you, and starting with Sudhindra, can you share an example of a really good experience you had in dealing with the UX ecosystem in India, and one not really that good?
I think, see, there's several of them actually, but then I think the best part of this, the emerging ecosystem is the fact that the new breed of designers that are coming in. So in many ways, the urban India mimics the West quite a bit. So, if you design for urban India, you're as good as designing for say, for example, the US. So the global outlook is similar. Now, these guys who are coming from this kind of a global outlook, the designers coming from there, actually give a run for the money for the seniors, the more established ones, right? So I think that's a very, very interesting thing. That's an amazing thing to see in this ecosystem. The new breed of designers, literally giving a run for money and, challenging the best practices, etc. The not so good part, I think, are because it's new and it's kind of coming up, lots of things that needs to work. You might be surprised that, back in 1960 is when the National Institute of Design actually started, very, very long ago. But since then, it has been slow. It's been frustratingly slow to actually make design blend with the culture of India. I think that's not that's for me, is kind of painful. The other thing is that there are lots of small companies that have emerged within the Indian ecosystem, design ecosystem. They're kind of taking the advantage of the design growing there. But the fact is, because these are all small, it's unstructured. So I think that's another area of concern. So if you leave it unstructured, it can go anywhere, right? So I think that's the other area that is sort of concerning for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my perspective will come from the person managing, from the US, managing a team in India. And I would say the biggest, thing that we have to work with is time zone. Usually my calls start at 10 p.m. if I'm managing my team in India. And the infrastructure is one of the things that could be better. If I were managing a team in China or other places, the team members can take the call at home, so they are more flexible. But in the case of India, we have to wait for them to come into work. So that's one thing. But the positive side of it is that the amazing resilience of the designers in India. In fact, I do feel for them sometimes, because it's a very engineering centric, many companies, high-tech companies are engineering centric to begin with, and then engineering centers in India are even more engineering driven. So it's a tough environment for designers to work in, and I have to give credit to the designers who work in that context, and still make change. So I would say the time zone, if the infrastructure gets better in India, things will be a lot better. And finally, if we can, the resilience is something that is really amazing, an amazing quality in the Indian colleagues.
Sorry.
So no, it's hard for me to answer this question because I've been a part of this ecosystem. But I can, give one example which sort of talks about some of the cultural nuances, right? I remember actually one interaction with Eric. Eric, he's sitting in the audience, and it was interesting that, this was, I think almost 12 years back, there was a project, and I'm just sharing that story in context of, what can be better, right? So I think it was a project for some airline company, and it was tracking aircrafts, and one of our colleagues was expecting a deliverable from me, and I said, I'll share it by my end of the day, right? And I was working very hard on it because I really wanted to do a really good job. And I thought my end of the day is that when I'll go back home, which is going to be, sometime 10 p.m. in the night. And then I'm still working in the office at 10 p.m. I've not communicated that, I'm still working on it. And my colleague was desperately, trying to figure out what happened. Sarit has still not sent a deliverable. And then she sent an email to the CEO, Eric, and Eric sends me a frantic email. Then I get a call. And I said, Eric, I'm still working on it. And I communicated I'm going to do it by end of the day. He said, no, end of the day means 6 p.m. your time. and it was deja vu for me when I was, I had a team here and I had a team in India. And I would, expect deliverables that, hey, you know what, we have a presentation day after tomorrow. Please send that out to me. And I'm 8 a.m. in a meeting and I still don't have it. And then I think those issues happen a lot. So that's one aspect of it. But I think in terms of, if you again talk about from a cultural perspective, the thing which amazes me sometimes, being Indian, there is always a pressure of not saying no, right? And always saying yes to or agreeing to something. And I've seen that leads to problems as well as to opportunities. And I give this example just from the perspective that, sometimes I've been given projects, hey, go do user research and then come back with insights and, and create some, or do a cognitive walkthrough. And, I came back and I figured out, I actually don't know what a cognitive walkthrough is, and I just agreed to that. So then I had to really work hard to figure out what it is, and because I said yes to it. And so I think that sort of works out, and I've seen that happening over and over again with my team members, that they would always take this stuff, and then, but people who have been educated in the Western world, they would ask a lot of questions, rightly so, that, hey, you know what, clarify, this is what you've asked, this is what I'm going to deliver, this is when I'm going to deliver. And in Indian context, I think sometimes that uncertainty sort of works both ways. Yeah, I think while we are talking about interaction with the Indian ecosystem, I just wanted to give one example, which is about, how does it sort of manifest in terms of a product outcome. So I was reading someplace about these two companies, car companies. So one is, of course, Uber, which is also operating in India, and Ola, which is also operating in India. Both of them introduced this feature of a shared taxi. I think Ola is called Ola Share and Uber is, I think, the Uber Pool, right? And one guy was sharing an experience on the end-to-end, and interestingly, the guy was sitting in an Ola cab, and in an Ola cab, because it was a share, in the height of a traffic scenario, the guy decided to take a U-turn to pick up another guy, and in the process, the guy who was sitting inside the car got delayed big time, right? But Uber had certain models to think about that end-to-end experiential journey that, that at a peak time, don't take a shared guy because it's going to lead to a bad review because the guy was sitting in the car. So the design got really nice in terms of the app, but the overall customer experience suffered because of not thinking through end-to-end customer solution. I think, so when we think about Indian UX ecosystem, I think how those customer journeys are mapped out and how those communication and conversations happen between cross-functional teams, something like that can be made better.
Yeah, my perspective is kind of dependent on some personal experiences. And we did this project for Nokia called Ways of Working. And when we did this project, we realized that Indians work differently. And we are kind of, because of this globalization, imposed on Indians a model of working system and schedules that are very westernized. Whereas in India, there are many more relationships that have to be addressed. And a lot of times schedules are not met, not because they didn't want to meet the schedule, but there were other things that had to be done. You would not say to your family that you could not come for a function or you could not go somewhere because I had a deliverable on Friday. You cannot do that. And when you understand that, and when we did this research, there were a lot of things that came in, and a model came out about how work has different definitions. And my experience when I moved back in 2006, I was working with a Western model where if a deliverable was supposed to be at 5 p.m. on Friday, and if it didn't happen, I would scream at my vendor, and I would say, okay, why is it not delivered? And I remember one day my wife telling me that we should move back to US, otherwise you're going to get a heart attack. And I changed my way of working, where two things I did was one, when I sit with the vendor, questions that Sarit was asking about, do you know what you're supposed to do, and what exactly will it take to deliver? And most of the time, because of the pleasing nature of Indians, they would say, oh, I can do this, and I can do this in 4 days. I would try to get a realistic picture, add a couple of days additional to that, and you wouldn't believe the thing changed. The relationships changed, and because there is a relationship, Indians would bend backwards to deliver the best that they can and on time. I did not have a single deliverable, and I don't still have a heart attack. So there is a way of working with Indians, and if you can understand how to work with Indians, they can give you the best possible thing.
Okay. I think in my perspective, the one thing that really has been so fulfilling is what you've already touched upon it in the previous question, is this whole ability to empathize and understand the other. So I find, as I work across, teams, HFI teams in other parts of the world as well as India, in India, the designers don't have to be convinced in any way about the fact that you must first understand what users need. And if it's a different point of view from what you think, that's fine. It's just a natural, I think, for Indians, because of the way of the diversity, et cetera, that we have to negotiate all the time. It's a given that, yes, there are different people and we have to accommodate the differences. I find that very, very interesting in terms of a difference, and a very positive sort of experience every time we work with, every time I work with Indian designers. The thing that has been a challenge is the inability of Indian designers, and it's not just designers, I think it's just part of the culture, to market themselves and market themselves aggressively. So we've had several experiences where really good consultant, fantastic design ideas, etc., sits in a meeting with a global client and will not say anything. Whereas someone else who's perhaps more junior but is from the US, who's part of the HFI team that has gone in, is saying so much. But this guy who's really done a lot of work is quiet. And then as we speak to them later saying, why didn't you say what you've done? And why didn't you, talk about it? We're like, no, but that would be so rude. That would be, I can't blow my own trumpet. It's a conditioning about being modest, about being humble. And there is value in that, of course. Sometimes it's really quite aggravating to see the kind of aggressive marketing that happens from, other parts of the world. But there has to be a balance. And I find sometimes Indian designers lose out because they feel so sort of weighed down by this whole construct of being humble and modest. And that, I hope, can change. So that's my perspective. We'll take one question or comment. Sure.
Hi, I'm Sanjay, and I'm from Samsung. I'm working in Bangalore, so I can closely relate to what panel is saying, all of those points, being there, working in the industry for some years now. So my question, so what we discussed in this session was more from the point of view of designers, from the corporate, from the startup, as well as from the academics. My question is from the point of view of our users, for whom we design. Okay. So do you think there is a difference between a user who is out there globally and the users who are there in India? So do you think we are still, as a user, we are like that only, or we have also evolved?
Well,
in terms of design sensitivity, of course.
Well, I think, again, two parts to that, to the answer I have. One is that, like I think in many other countries which are called emerging, or as in the plenary today we heard another term, lean economies, in all of these countries there's always a layer of privileged, sort of elite and privileged, affluent segment of the population. I think that segment, which is very tiny, is always very global, and shares similar preferences and attitudes, etc., with that level of the population anywhere in the world. So there's no difference. But as you go down the pyramid, the socio-economic pyramid, I think there's more local flavor and influence in the users' preferences, sensitivity to aesthetics, to functionality, to affordability, etc. And I think that's a good thing, because it is that diversity that also hones your skills as a designer, as you understand that it's not one size fits all, that you have to think about different solutions if needed. So I look at We Are Like This only as quite a positive way to, for me as an innovator or designer, to react to that situation. It would be quite boring if everybody was exactly the same across the world. That's my perspective. So yes, there are local flavors, and it's different depending upon which part of the socioeconomic pyramid. Is it urban, rural, etc.
I think one of the biggest reasons why users are changing in India is because of mobile, right? And the biggest enabler, if you look at something like an Android phone, and I think just to give you an example, right? Suddenly there is a device which a user can make mistakes in private and learn from it, and nobody else is there to criticize them. It's a huge thing. And now think about your mom and father or anybody else who was not exposed to technology devices earlier on, but now they have this singular device which they have this daily, day in and day out, and the number of times through repetitive learning, they're learning a lot. Plus, because of that, they're getting exposed to what's out there, and this is also becoming an enabler for them to get things done, like, for example, getting in touch with their family, calling somebody, looking up stuff. So I think this is, in my view, is going to be a big, this will cause a big need for better designs. And people are getting very vocal, right? You'll realize that, Facebook changes feed, the first level of feedback starts coming from India. Right? We are not able to find things and so on and so forth. And WhatsApp, if you know what's happening with WhatsApp, right? The way people are beginning to make groups, and the way so many people were not online, they are using it now, because since they are exposed to such designs and they have learned it based upon that repetitive use, they would start expecting the same level of design competence from other products which are available. That's my hunch, and I think it's already happening based on the demands that I've seen users making on designs.
Yeah, and I can echo some of those statements that some of the young designers and users out there in India are definitely using all the social media platforms. Anytime I post something, I get a lot of comments and reviews from a lot of my connections in India. So that's definitely there. But I have to say, from my personal experience, my father has businesses in India, and many relatives. They don't rely on technology. So what I mean by that is that they have, could be because of infrastructure issues or unreliability, they get things done in other ways. So their notion of what is, they don't share the Western notion. And I think the plenary speaker spoke about it very in a nice way about the formality bias and how we expect most of the systems to work in a formal way. And I think in places where people have had to have the grit and resilience to make things happen in other ways, they have formed other systems. So I think, the users are definitely different, and I wouldn't say good or bad, they've just made things work for them. But over time, as hopefully the infrastructure gets more stable, it should be pretty universal.
So when you talk about Indian users, it's not one homogeneous group, right? You understand that. And there are two factors that one is to consider. One is called as a socio-economic classification, and the other one is socio-cultural classification. And if you look at those two classifications, how people in India can be divided, you would then figure out there is a particular socio-cultural and socio-economic class that is no different than any of the so-called fat economies or developed countries. However, there are many other socio-economic classes and socio-cultural classes which are so different. And for those, then you have to understand, and to use Steve Jobs' terminology, you have to grok. If you don't understand that community, you are going to design completely wrong things. But 250 million is the last time I checked the number of a socio-economic and socio-cultural class that mimics US. So it's a huge market. Right? So for that, there is no difference. I mean, you can use that as a user base, because I hear from a lot of people that, oh, my users are in Europe and I don't have direct access to them. So what? You have similar kind of people in India. But as you go, as Apala said, as you go down the socio-economic class and the socio-cultural, then the users differ substantially.
Okay, cool. So just the last question, because I know we are running out of time. What are your suggestions, panelists, for the UX ecosystem in India to improve? And Girish, I'll ask you to go first.
Yeah, and few things. I mean, and what I have started, having been on the industry side and now on the academic side, is multiple things that I've started. One is working with the industry very closely to develop programs. And I tell my industry partners, and Sudhindra is one of them, we work with SAP very closely in Bangalore, is we want to create designers who would be appropriate, but don't make them so aligned with what you're doing today. So it's been a good mix, and that is what I think will improve the education system, to create designers who can develop screens and user experience for this, but also can think about what the future is going to be. The type of programs that needs to be brought in from the academic side has to be aligned with what's today and what's in the future. At the same time, to break this gap currently of trying to create or trying to make bring the best finesse in user interface, there have to be programs to make that happen, and many of the schools have started doing that. So that's what I would.
Sorry.
So I think Girish has already touched upon what needs to happen on the academic side. I think the definition of UX needs to be broadened to include people who are directly responsible for shipping design, like people who are business decision makers, as well as the technology leaders. And also helping the design leaders such that they can have the right conversations with their counterparts, to have a team which they can grow and mentor, and to make sure that that they are having the right conversations within it. Because so I think one of the key things that I've seen from a UX consulting days to sitting in a product organization is, as I was telling Girish just before the panel, there is many a slip between the design and the ship. Right? You design something and there's a beautiful deck, there's a user stories we've created, we've done whole persona work, there's a user research that has been done. And by the time we are getting into these weekly sprint cycles and making sure that the right conversations are happening and levels of pixel level of discussions are happening. And while your design is being put together, it's being coded by somebody else. Right? And by the time you see what gets shipped, there's a big difference between the two. I think that level, that helping the ecosystem to work out loud such that everybody is aware what we are going to be designing for, everybody is aware that why are we designing what we are designing, and everybody is aware who we are designing it for, and creating that culture within the organization to make sure those levels of empathy is there with every single person. Not just the designers are not just the custodians of user understanding. Everybody should be, because that's the only way we can, ship a product which has great user experience. I think that's where, at least in the industry side, there is some amount of work that can be done. While, in academic, you can prepare the people in the right way.
Yeah. So my suggestion would be to really leverage the innovation capability of India, and for that, the academics is a big part of the puzzle, where students have to be encouraged to be creative and really instill and nurture the creative confidence in each of them, so they can come to the, when they come into work, they already have that a little bit of skills under their belt. And I think executives in India have to realize the potential of design, and initially we have to give an equal seat at the table, and this has to be a top-down mandate, because there is only so much change that can happen from the grassroots level, and for designers to get the seat at the table, it has to It has to come from the top. And once that seat is made available, designers have to be ready to play an effective role when that were to happen.
Yeah, just to add to all the things that were just discussed right now, I think beyond the formal means also, like for example, creating programs and seeking a place at the table and so on, beyond the formal, the official means, there is also the need for design leaders to actually take up the mantle and shape it up, shape the design ecosystem in whichever direction it needs to go. Now, which direction it needs to go is a debatable thing that we will, of course, debate. But people within this panel, of course, and then even all the other leaders that are out there need to sit together and then give it the right shape, because this is a time of transition. And time of transition has always been characterized by personal involvements and beyond the official capacities as well. So I think that is very, very important for us to do, and this is the time to do that. The second aspect is we spoke about Indian companies going global, thinking globally. But they also have to do enough to nurture the Indian talent, to nurture the Indian design ecosystem themselves. They need to invest in it, because if you nurture an Indian design ecosystem, it's going to nurture the business back as well. So that business and design ecosystem also need to go hand in hand. I think these are the two things I can think of which is urgently needed. Then it will be in the right shape going forward.
Yeah, I think between all four of you, you've covered all the relevant advice, and I think the education part of it is so important. It's good news that there are so many new programs that have started, and I think Srishti is doing an incredible job, just as NID still continues to do a very good job. But we need many more such programs. Otherwise, it is such a challenge to be able to get qualified designers, with some level of confidence about their own skills. The other is, Sudhindra, as you rightly pointed out, I think there is a need for us to have an umbrella sort of design organization. The technology part they have, whether it's NASSCOM, etc. There's an organization that looks after the interests of technology organizations, technology professionals, but we don't have anything like that on the design side in India. And I think that's very important, unless there is something and I'm missing that.
Yeah, there is.
Okay.
Design Council India is an organization which is supposedly for design, and it's becoming active. Apart from that, there is an organization for product, UX and product, and that's quite active. So it is true. Now, one more thing about UX ecosystem from an education perspective, right? We don't necessarily have the best educators in this area in India. And even though the audience is very small here, and hopefully this is getting recorded and others will listen to this, I would really request people who can come and spend time in India to come and be part of the education system. In Srishti, for example, we have created a system where you can come for a month. If you want to come and do a sabbatical for 6 months or 2 weeks, you can come and teach and be part of the ecosystem which will build the next generation of ecosystem. We have kept it very flexible. We won't pay you big bucks, we can't, but it will be a fantastic experience for you to be part of this ecosystem that is growing and then contribute. So please take on that, and if you're interested, connect with us.
Okay, thank you. So unless there is one last question or comment, I guess we are done with the panel for today. Thank you very much for all of you coming in here, and thank you to all my panelists for being here on the panel.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Paula.
you, Paula.